Hello again, thanks for choosing to watch this video. This is part 2 of the Air Carrier VFX shot from Ultraquest. The study model was built out of foam core and hot glue, two of the greatest inventions known to the scratch building modeler. For those who don't know, hot glue comes out of a heated hot glue gun. Just you plug it in, it heats up the glue to soften it up, and it sticks really well. The glue is hot, so you got to be careful. But I kind of think of it like welding. So you can kind of put a spot of hot glue on something and it holds it. So it's great for joins that will never be seen because it's very hard once it's dry. So you can either cut away excess, which can be a bit tricky, or I just try and use it as much as possible where the glue just won't be seen. Foam core is, as the name suggests, it's a soft, spongy foam that's sandwiched between two pieces of cardboard. So it's very strong, it's very rigid, but it's very light. And you can cut it like you can cut cardboard quite precisely. Because of the thickness of the foam core, you could actually cut at an angle to butt things together and glue them together at angles. So foam core is great, and you can buy it in sheets of like, I don't know, 3 foot square or 2.5 foot square, and it's not hugely expensive. Thoroughly recommend it. So the ship, it's got a wooden frame made out of 1/2 inch square dowels for the most part, primarily because the big engine pods have to rotate and the center section has to come out. So I wanted to make sure the thing had enough of a solid framework that it would all hold together and not wobble and bend and twist and break. And actually, when I was building the initial frame, it was quite frustrating at times and getting everything lined up. And I thought, you know what? This is a pain, but it's a neat design. And I bet they were swearing and cursing when they were building Thunderbird 2 as well, because that has a front and a back and 2 struts that hold it together. And God darn it, if the pod was actually part of the fuselage, it would be simple, but it would be simpler, but it isn't. So I thought, all right. A big part of this model is that it is being built for a film and is designed based on the story needs, and the model is being built around on the shot needs. So the air carrier has a pretty minor role in the film, really. You see it land and fly along a little bit. You really only see it in profile or kind of 3/4 from the front. So the far side of it, the starboard side, you don't really see. So that's not going to get detailed. And a couple of areas are not even going to get finished in terms of the hull. I'm going to leave open areas so I can get in there for practical reasons, lighting and things like that. The cabin area has to detach, so I wanted to make sure that all worked correctly. So that's built square. I got to make sure that the thicknesses of the walls are still narrow enough that it will slide up and down through the hole in the hull. Because it has very big windows, you will see the cabin inside, and the ship is going to be, as I said, sort of flying around. So I don't have any motion control to mat in an interior. I am going to mat in the people, but I think that's going to be a little more forgiving because they're not a rigid part of the ship. Anyway, long way of saying I have to build an interior to the cabin, but because I don't see the other side, I can still have access to that interior through the starboard side. It's going to be one side of it will have the exterior, and then you'll see the inside of the opposite side, but not the exterior. Hopefully this graphic makes that a little bit clearer. Anyway, it's going to be fun to build all that stuff inside and build chairs and little fire extinguishers and sort of design that cabin a bit. Ideally, in the making of the film, that would have been designed and probably shot and then would match the model to it. But so onto the main ship, I used corrugated cardboard for the main skin as it allows for some curvature, but the ship itself is pretty faceted, so cardboard seemed like a good way to go. It's easy to work with and it's very cheap. I built bulkheads out of 1/4 inch foam core, just sort of like either side of where the cabin fits in, and a little bit of structure at the front. And then I cut cardboard panels to sort of skin it. And it's round about this point that I think the enormity of this project sort of hit me. It's kind of like this thing is about 3 feet long. The hull is about a foot wide, so you add another foot once you kind of get the wings on it, and it starts getting heavy as you put glue and wood and all this stuff on it. So yeah, the enormity is kind of like, oh my goodness, what have I got myself into? But then that's a brief moment, and very shortly after that, it actually starts to look like something cool. So you're like, oh, okay, it's all going to be fine. But there's a little moment in the middle where you've just got this big chunk of wood and cardboard and glue and sellotape, and you're just like, oh my goodness. So the entire hull was covered in cardboard, and I had some 1/4 inch balsa, a 1/4 inch dowel used on some of the longer straight pieces just to sort of help keep it solid and straight and everything else like that. Everything was measured up from the graphic, which has a 1² = 1 inch sort of scale to it, and everything was measured twice and cut once. I had to make rough templates, which I did with offcuts of cardboard and paper in some cases, to get the proper shapes, because it is kind of a bit of a geometrical challenge up front there. And I got those templates and then sort of traced those off onto the cardboard or foam core that was actually going to be used for those final pieces. I favor tracing off a shape because it ensures perfect symmetry. You can do everything with angles and rulers and all the rest of it, and I absolutely start that way and recommend everyone does it that way. But there's nothing like having a shape, especially a complex one that you've had to figure out, and tracing that off so that you have an exact copy of it. And if it's, as in the case of the ship, the nose cone, you basically just flop that drawing over, and then it gives you the thing in reverse. So you put those two together and it'll be sort of perfectly symmetrical. Now, in some cases, it may not be 100% accurate, but if something has strayed in the building of that first part, you want to mirror that. The thing needs to be symmetrical, otherwise it either doesn't fit together or it looks crooked and all the rest of it. So I'm a big favor of tracing it off, making sure they're exactly the same and not too far away from the original design. So once the skin or the hull was completed, I set about filling in some of the rougher areas where there was a bit of glue or gaps and what have you. And so I did a pass of that, but it became apparent pretty quickly that even when all sanded, the shape was going to be pretty angular because the cardboard was just too thin to actually get any real curvature out of the thickness of it. So the thing was looking more angular than I wanted. So I made the decision to basically cover the whole thing in a layer of foam core, which is 3/8 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch thick or something, and can be sanded. So you've got like a 3/8 of an inch join to round that off and just make the whole thing look a little more elegant and aerodynamic. The filling, I use this stuff that I've used before. It's a tube. It's in the UK called polyfiller. It's basically a pre-mixed plaster and you squeeze it out sort of like toothpaste. It's easy to work with. It dries really quickly. It's not very heavy when it's done and you can sand it. So I did a pass of that once it had all the foam core on it, sanded it. Still some gaps, still some areas. There's a couple of areas where there's quite a bit of the polyfiller just to kind of get a shape. So I gave it another pass, sanding again, and I think it looks good enough at this point. The wings and tails are made from laminated corrugated cardboard. So the cardboard you get from any kind of grocery box. I laminated it, and for the front wings, which is a big area and don't really have to support anything because of the wooden strut, but I wanted them to be sturdy, so I cut the shapes at right angles across the trenches in the cardboard, so when I glued them together it would be as rigid as possible. I did a similar thing with the tail fin and the spine along the top of it, and then that's all hot glued in place. I used a spirit level just to make sure that front wing was going to be perpendicular to the rest of the ship. So I used a little spirit level. I had to make sure the surface it was sitting on also had a spirit level pass to make sure that was flat, and then the ship has a flat bottom that sits on the flat table, and then anything you use spirit level on is all flat. I actually, for some of the smaller areas, I used a spirit level app in my phone and was able to put that in there, which is just, great. Isn't technology great? During a lot of this, there's a lot of cutting of wood and cardboard and getting nice joins and stuff. I recalled my woodwork teacher, Mr. Smith, who was an excellent teacher, and he just had a couple of great phrases that I just really remember, and I think anyone who took his class remembers. It was always cut on the waste side of the line. So when you draw a line, there's always the thickness of either the lead or the blade of what you're using is going to cut something out. That's kind of how it works, especially with saw in wood. So make sure that the inside of that blade line is on the outside edge of the thing you want to cut. Otherwise, you're going to be cutting into the size of the thing you want, and it won't fit properly. So yeah, always cut on the waist side of the line. Always measure twice, cut once, and whatever you cut, you can always plane something down a bit or chisel it down a bit or sand it down or cut it again, but you can never put it back. Once you've made that cut, that's it. You can't put anything back. And one of the things he drummed into us was, you should always do a wood joint or a joint of anything really that doesn't need glue or nails or screws to hold it together. If you can do a wood joint that everything goes exactly at the right angle it's supposed to, and it fits so snugly that it doesn't need glue or anything else to hold it together rigid, then you've done a good job. And I was able to do that on one piece of this, the front spar. I was actually able to do that joint. I don't think there are many things more satisfying in life than making a wood joint that fits together so perfectly that it doesn't need glue or nails or screws, and everything's at exactly the right angle, and it's just done. So we've got the ship, it's got its hull. I then moved on to the engines. The engines have to rotate through 90 degrees. The intakes that run along the bottom of the ship came out a little wider. They just looked better than the way they are on the study model. So I needed to make sure that when the engines are there, they can rotate fully 90 degrees. Because when they are upright, they touch the ground. The ship's got a flat bottom, so the bottom of those intakes and the cabin touch the ground, and the bottom of the engines touch the ground. So that needed a little bit of careful sort of measuring and whatever. These small boxes were almost the right size, just a bit smaller than the engines, which was perfect. They're corrugated cardboard. They're good, solid boxes. So they're totally square. They're totally rigid. So I used that for the basis. There's a wooden dowel, just under a quarter-inch wooden dowel that runs all the way through both wings, both engines, through the middle of the fuselage, and will protrude beyond that on the starboard side so that can be rotated off screen and the engines will rotate. On the study model, I used just a couple of toothpicks pushed through the foam core and into the engines just so they would waggle around a bit and I could see them in the horizontal or vertical positions. One thing I'm a little concerned about is the pylon wings that go back from the engines to the back of the ship. They're attached to the fuselage at the back, but at the front, they're kind of held in position by this sort of rotating axle that the engines are on. So there's nothing actually holding it rigid. So that's a little bit of a concern that won't be rigid enough. And when the engines rotate, that outer wing may sort of wobble a little bit. There's a part of me that says if it picks up a little bit of wobble, that might actually really look good, because it may give a sense of the sort of the power of the engines that's in there, and it's sort of shaking a bit and actually brings the thing to life in a way that if it's solid it may just look like a dead model. But I don't know if it's all rigid, great. If there's the right amount of wobble or just reaction in that when the engines are going, then great. But we'll just have to wait and see. Just a little bit of a concern, and I'm sure come episode 4 or 5 we'll be talking about this a lot more, one way or another. I superglued metal washers just over those holes on both sides just to kind of keep it all as straight and perpendicular as I could. So the engines are sort of done in their rough shape. Those need to be blended and contoured in the same way that I did with the hull, with foam core and filler and sanding and whatever. I'm going to paint it with appliance enamel. It's spray cans you can get from a hardware store, and it's very hard and durable. Perfect to work on from them to then add details and paneling and little bits and pieces onto that sort of smooth surface. My goal is to try and get these videos out on a regular basis, but more than that, I want to make sure there is actually useful information in there. So tune in for part 3 coming soon. Please put any questions or comments below. Check out my website, check out my other videos, and have a great day. See you soon. Bye.